In Colorado Springs, Colorado, on the morning of July 19, 2004, at approximately 5:45 a.m., emergency services received a call. The caller was Elias Vance, 28 years old. His wife, Clara Hayes, 27, was missing. According to Elias, Clara had left the house earlier that morning for her usual jog. She never came back. That single call triggered what initially appeared to be a routine missing person investigation. It would not remain routine for long. Responding officers arrived at the Vance residence shortly after. The home sat in a quiet, established neighborhood, tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, the kind of place where serious crime was statistically rare. Elias Vance met officers at the door. He appeared shaken, anxious. He told them Clara was pregnant with their first child. He emphasized her routine, the same route, the same early hour, the same habit every morning. When she didn't return, he said he knew something was wrong. The fact that Clara was in the late stages of pregnancy immediately elevated the case. This was no longer just a missing jogger. This was a vulnerable woman and an unborn child. Investigators moved quickly. Standard missing person protocols were initiated. Officers canvassed the surrounding area, knocking on doors, questioning neighbors, asking if anyone had seen Clara that morning. Nothing surfaced. No sightings, no screams, no disturbances. Inside the home, there were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. But there were details that didn't sit quite right. Clara's keys were still inside. So was her wallet, items she never left behind when she went out for a run. At the time, these observations were logged but not emphasized. They were not yet conclusions, just notes, because the priority remained clear: find Clara Hayes. A pregnant woman had vanished without explanation, and with every passing hour, the sense that this case was not what it first appeared to be began to grow.
The disappearance of Clara Hayes was not just a missing person case. It was the first visible fracture in a life that appeared carefully assembled. To anyone looking in from the outside, Elias Vance and Clara Hayes fit a familiar American image: a young couple in Colorado Springs, a stable marriage, a baby on the way. The kind of life that suggested progress, security, a future already mapped out. Elias, in particular, presented himself as driven and intelligent, someone with ambition. He told family, friends, and Clara that he was pursuing a medical career. He claimed to be a graduate of Western State University. He said he had been accepted into Southern Piedmont University for medical school. Long hours, demanding coursework, a future doctor in the making. It was a story he repeated often, and it was a story people believed. That narrative mattered. It shaped how others saw him. It shaped how Clara saw her husband. Friends later recalled a couple who appeared close, supportive, and optimistic. Clara spoke proudly of Elias's accomplishments. She trusted the future he described. Their plans, financial decisions, long-term goals, even their social standing were built on that foundation. But beneath that image, something was fundamentally wrong. The academic credentials Elias described could not be verified. The medical program, the university acceptance, the demanding student life, none of it existed. It was fiction, a carefully sustained lie, maintained over years. This deception was not peripheral. It was central to Elias Vance's identity, as a husband, as a professional, as a man others trusted. And when that fabrication began to unravel, it did more than expose dishonesty. It destabilized the entire structure of the marriage. The case would eventually become a study in prolonged deceit, how deeply a lie can embed itself into daily life, and how catastrophic the consequences can be when the truth finally surfaces.
The investigation into Clara Hayes' disappearance quickly narrowed its focus to three central figures: Clara Hayes herself, her husband, Elias Vance, and Clara's father, Arthur Hayes. Each would play a critical role in what was about to come apart. Clara Hayes was 27 years old. Those who knew her described her as trusting, supportive, and deeply invested in her marriage. She had been with Elias for years before they married. Throughout that time, she believed in his ambitions without hesitation. She was pregnant with their first child, a fact that anchored her commitment to the future they were building together. While Elias claimed to be immersed in medical studies, Clara worked part-time, helping support the household. She accepted his explanation for long hours, for stress, for distance. The story he told, graduation from Western State University, acceptance into Southern Piedmont University Medical School, was the foundation of their life. But in the weeks before her disappearance, that foundation began to shift. Clara noticed small things, questions answered vaguely, documents never produced, phone calls he avoided. Nothing overt, nothing explosive, just enough to make uneasy. Elias Vance, 28, was far more complicated. To the outside world, he appeared intelligent, driven, disciplined, a man with a plan. In reality, that identity was a fabrication. Elias was a college dropout, no degree, no medical school acceptance. Every academic achievement he claimed was invented. And it wasn't a single lie. It was years of sustained deception. The motivation behind it can only be inferred. A need to be admired, a fear of failure, a desire to control how others saw him. What is clear is that Elias possessed the ability to maintain this illusion with precision. The person who finally disrupted it was Arthur Hayes, Clara's father. Pragmatic, observant, Arthur had long been uneasy about the lack of concrete details surrounding Elias's education. He urged Clara to verify the claims herself. She did. Clara contacted Western State University, then Southern Piedmont University. The answers were unambiguous. No degree, no acceptance, no record of Elias Vance at either institution. The truth was absolute. On the evening before her disappearance, Clara confronted Elias, presented him with the facts. Faced with evidence he could no longer deny, Elias confessed. All of it, every lie. Clara told him she needed time to think, time to speak with her family. She planned to address it the following morning. That confrontation, the collapse of Elias Vance's constructed identity, marked the end of the lie, and it set the stage for what would happen next.
After Clara Hayes confronted Elias Vance with proof he could no longer deny, everything changed. She told him the truth was out. She told her her family would know. That moment marked a point of no return. According to the reconstructed timeline, sometime during the night and into the early morning hours of July 19, 2004, Elias Vance made a decision. Inside the home, Elias discharged a firearm. The bullet struck Clara in the head. The injury was fatal. Investigators later determined that the sound had been deliberately muffled, likely using surrounding materials, a calculated effort to prevent anyone nearby from hearing the shot. What followed was not panic, it was process. In the hours after the killing, Elias began systematically erasing evidence. He cleaned the immediate area, removing biological traces that could reveal what had happened. A mattress bearing biological residue was taken from the home. The firearm used in the shooting was also removed. Both items were placed into an industrial dumpster, a deliberate choice. Large capacity, scheduled removal, eventual transport to a landfill. Recovery would be difficult, if not impossible. Elias then moved Clara's body. Her remains were placed into the same industrial waste container. With that single act, he eliminated both the victim and the primary physical evidence from the crime scene. The choice of disposal location suggested forethought, and understanding of waste logistics and how quickly evidence could vanish once it entered the commercial waste stream. But Elias wasn't finished. To redirect attention away from the house, he staged a secondary scene. Clara's vehicle was driven to a nearby park. There, it was abandoned. The setting was intentional, a public recreational area, a place that supported a different story, a jog, a walk, a disappearance during routine activity. At approximately 5:45 a.m., Elias Vance placed the call. He reported his wife missing. He told dispatch that Clara had gone out for her morning jog and never returned. The call sounded like concern, like confusion, like fear. But by the time that call was made, the crime had already been completed. The killing, the cleanup, the disposal, the staging. Together, these actions formed a cohesive effort to conceal a homicide and mislead investigators. It was not impulsive, it was deliberate, and it would soon begin to unravel.
After the 5:45 a.m. call on July 19, 2004, Elias Vance began executing a story, a carefully constructed one. He told investigators that Clara had gone out for her usual early morning jog. He emphasized routine, normalcy, nothing out of the ordinary. But almost immediately, the story began to strain. Detectives noted that Clara's keys were still inside the house. So was her wallet, items she never left behind.
Then there was the car. Clara's vehicle was located abandoned in a nearby park. Elias offered this as proof that she had vanished without explanation, but the detail didn't align with the jog narrative he insisted on. As the search for Clara expanded, investigators began to narrow their focus on Elias. At first, his demeanor appeared appropriate, concerned, emotional, cooperative, but that impression didn't last. Across multiple interviews, his account shifted. Small changes, subtle omissions, details that moved just enough to draw attention. Not the mistakes of poor memory, but the adjustments of someone managing a story. Publicly, Elias leaned into the role of a grieving husband. He spoke to local media, made emotional appeals, asked for help. Privately, in the interview room, detectives saw something else, a controlled calm, a calculated composure. At their request, Elias agreed to a polygraph examination. The results were clear, significant indicators of deception. While not admissible in court, the outcome confirmed what investigators already suspected. The focus shifted. Detectives began verifying Elias's background. Formal inquiries were sent to Western State University and Southern Piedmont University. The responses came back quickly, definitive, unambiguous. Elias Vance had never graduated from Western State. He had never been accepted to Southern Piedmont. The academic life he described, the future doctor persona, did not exist. This revelation was critical. It confirmed the deception Clara Hayes had uncovered just hours before her disappearance, and it provided motive. What had been a missing person case now pointed toward homicide. Investigators maintained pressure. Elias continued to deny involvement, but his credibility was gone. At this stage, detectives made a strategic decision. They allowed Elias to interact with his family, specifically his brothers, Marcus and Peter Vance. Those conversations changed everything. Confronted by his own family, by their concerns, by the evidence, by the psychological unraveling, Elias broke. He confessed to his brothers. Shortly afterward, he confessed to detectives. He detailed the murder of Clara Hayes, the cleanup, the disposal, the staging. Within 48 hours of reporting his wife missing, Elias Vance was arrested for murder. The deception had held briefly, but not long enough.
Elias Vance's confession changed everything. Once he admitted that Clara Hayes had been killed and discarded in an industrial dumpster, the investigation shifted to a task few departments ever face. They had to search a landfill. Not a single location, not a contained site, but a vast, active landfill containing thousands of tons of refuse. Traditional search methods were useless here. Heavy machinery was brought in. Bulldozers, excavators, conveyor systems. Alongside them worked a specialized team, forensic anthropologists, crime scene technicians, and law enforcement officers, operating in harsh, hazardous conditions day after day. The dumpster Elias identified had already been collected and emptied weeks earlier. That waste load had been transported to a regional landfill. Finding it meant reconstructing waste management records, collection routes, and disposal timelines. Investigators had to pinpoint where a single load of trash had been buried inside an ever-changing landscape. Beginning in September 2004, the search commenced. For 33 consecutive days, teams sifted through garbage, layer by layer. Thousands of tons. Every item was examined. Clothing, plastic, metal, household debris. Investigators searched for anything, biological material, personal effects, or fragments that did not belong. It was slow, exhausting, unforgiving work. Then, on October 21, 2004, the search paid off. Clara Hayes' remains were found among the refuse. The discovery confirmed what investigators already knew, but now it was undeniable. She was gone, and she had been there all along. Alongside her remains, additional evidence was recovered. The firearm Elias had used, fragments of the mattress he had disposed of, physical proof. Each item directly corroborated his confession. Clara's remains were sent for autopsy. The results were clear. Cause of death, a gunshot wound to the head. The injury was fully consistent with Elias's account. Ballistics testing matched the recovered firearm to the bullet found in her remains. Despite the degradation caused by time and exposure,
Biological evidence from the mattress fragments supported the conclusion that the homicide occurred inside the home. Digital evidence further reinforced the case. Cell phone records, movement timelines, vehicle placement, each element aligned with Elias's confession: the disposal, the staging of Clara's car, the false report. Piece by piece, science replaced speculation. The remains, the weapon, the forensic analysis, the timeline. Together, they formed an irrefutable record. The lie was gone. What remained were facts, and the confirmed truth of how Clara Hayes was murdered.
With the full weight of forensic evidence and Elias Vance's detailed confession, the investigation entered its final phase. The question was no longer what happened, it was how the case would end in court. Prosecutors assembled a comprehensive case file. Clara Hayes' recovered remains, the firearm, ballistics and autopsy results, and layered beneath it all, the documented proof of Elias Vance's long-running deception. The fabricated degrees, the non-existent medical school acceptance. Those lies were no longer background details, they were motive. Together, the evidence outlined a clear sequence: a life built on falsehoods, a confrontation that threatened exposure, and a calculated decision to kill. In June of 2005, Elias Vance appeared in court. By that point, the outcome was largely inevitable. Colorado law at the time still allowed the death penalty for capital murder. If the case went to trial, that sentence was on the table. Elias's defense team understood the reality. There was no viable path to acquittal. Negotiations began. The strategy was straightforward: admit guilt, avoid execution. A plea agreement was reached. Elias Vance formally pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. By doing so, he admitted that Clara Hayes' death was intentional, premeditated, and his responsibility. In exchange, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty. The plea spared Clara's family a lengthy and emotionally brutal trial. It also ensured a definitive conviction. The court sentenced Elias Vance to life in prison. Under the terms of the sentence, he would not be eligible for parole for at least 30 years. 3 decades behind bars before even the possibility of release. The sentence reflected the gravity of the crime: the murder of a pregnant wife, committed not in rage, but in desperation to preserve a lie. The legal process ended there, but the damage did not. For Clara Hayes' family, and for the community that once believed in the image Elias Vance presented, the case remains a stark reminder that carefully maintained deception, left unchecked, can end in irreversible violence.
The case of Clara Hayes stands as a chilling study in the destructive power of prolonged deception. For years, Elias Vance sustained an identity that did not exist, degrees he never earned, a career that was never real, a future built entirely on fabrication. When that illusion was finally exposed, the reality he had constructed collapsed. And rather than confront the truth, Elias chose violence to preserve a lie. This case reveals the psychological danger of placing self-image above accountability, of valuing a fabricated persona more than human life. It serves as a stark warning about the insidious nature of pathological dishonesty. When deception becomes identity, exposure becomes a threat. And when that threat is confronted, the consequences can be catastrophic. The investigation itself stands as a testament to forensic persistence. From early inconsistencies, to the slow unraveling of a false narrative, to the exhaustive excavation of a landfill, law enforcement and forensic science pursued the truth without compromise. Even when evidence was buried, degraded, and deliberately concealed, it was recovered. And it spoke. At the center of this case is Clara Hayes, a trusting partner, a pregnant woman, a life taken not in chaos, but in calculated silence. Her story is not defined by the lies told around her. It is defined by the truth that ultimately prevailed. Clara Hayes remains a reminder of how fragile trust can be, and how, in the end, evidence outlasts deception.